So we're going to get started. Again, this is Katie Helpling, the Executive Director for Annie, and we are thrilled to have Dr. Laura Anderko talking with us about PFAS today. It's definitely a hot topic, whether it's in our water, in our food. I think it's an area that nurses are really interested in, and I am thrilled that we're able to update our PFAS webinar and get the latest news on the science and what nurses can be doing around this topic. Before I introduce Laura, just as a reminder, we're able to offer 1 hour of continuing education for today's webinar. And in order to receive that, we will be sending you a post-test and evaluation, and you'll need to fill those out in order to get the continuing education credits. It usually takes us a couple days to get that out to you, and then it may take a couple days to respond. So if it doesn't come out right after today's webinar, don't worry, it'll be on its way. And we are also thrilled too that Annie is able to partner with the Mid-Atlantic Center for Children's Health and the Environment on this webinar series. If you haven't seen our other webinars in this series, especially here with Children's Environmental Health Month, we'll be sending out links to those as well. This is the 4th in the series, and they've all been spectacular. We've had the best presenters and lots of really great information and lots of great questions and discussion. So to introduce Dr. Laura Anderko, she's the co-director of the federally funded Region 3 Pediatric Environmental Health Specialty Unit at Villanova University College of Nursing, the Mid-Atlantic Center for Children's Health and the Environment. She's a nurse, educator, and scholar focusing on environmental health for over 20 years. She's served on a number of federal advisory committees and is currently a member of the National Academy of Medicine Committee establishing guidance on PFAS testing and health outcomes. In 2013, she was recognized by the Obama White House as a champion of change for her advocacy efforts in climate change and public health. Welcome, Laura.
Thanks, Katie, and welcome to everybody. Thanks to Hannah as well, the behind the scenes guru here. I am going to share my PowerPoint. It should be, no, it was up there and now it's not. Hold on a minute. Where did it go? I'm sorry, Katie, it was here and I thought it was floating. All right.
It happens.
Yeah. Yes, as I'm poking around here to try to find, here it is. It disappeared and hopefully it will be back. I did want to encourage folks, and I did ask Hannah to include in our chat box and to send to you all the Mid-Atlantic Center has a very in-depth handout fact sheet around PFAS with information about various research studies. We'll be touching on those today, but it will be not as in-depth as the fact sheet. So take a look at it, and this is my email address on the front here for screen. Or you can email us at MACCHE, M-A-C-C-H-E @villanova.edu, and we can answer your questions. So today we're going to talk about PFAS or per and polyfluoroalkyl alkyl substances, a very long name for a very large family of chemicals and their potential impact on children's health and nursing's role in advancing children's health around this chemical family. I do have to give a brief commercial, commercials everywhere. The center is funded through the American Academy of Pediatrics, the National Program Office, and the funds actually come from CDC, ATSDR, and EPA. And we're always grateful. I do want to mention, we're getting additional funds this year to cover PFAS education for health professionals in particular. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on in the presentation. We are housed in Region 3 at Villanova University in Pennsylvania, but we serve all states in that yellow region, and quite frankly, anyone else that calls us across the US. Here's our website and information on the lower right-hand side again, if you want to contact us via email. And overall, across the country, this network has two goals. One is to offer consultation and referral. Typically, that's on individuals, like my kid just chewed on the windowsill that has lead in it. What do I do? To outreach and educations like today. So today we're going to cover a lot of ground. I am going to leave time for questions. And if you have one, you don't want to get lost by the end of the chat, please put it in the chat box and we'll be sure to cover that. So we're going to talk a little bit about what are these chemicals, how they get into our bodies, what are the potential health effects, how as clinicians we can assess and manage medically symptoms, and potential illnesses as a result of exposure. What are the special issues for children? What's CDC ATSDR doing to help us better understand health effects and where it can be found, the PFAS. And also we'll finish off with some resources that are available. There's a couple of really great films. One is The Devil We Know. You can get these on Hulu or Netflix. The other is Dark Waters. The Devil We Know came out first, and it was the first film I saw that really put a face on this chemical family and what it had done to workers within the DuPont factory. It goes back as far as 1945 when DuPont began making Teflon. So it's been around a very long time. We have about 5,000 of these chemicals around. And so they are working on shorter chain so they don't stay in the body as long. But we're still seeing health effects regardless of long or short chain structures of those chemicals. For anybody that's interested, this is a map that gets updated by Environmental Working Group. It's interactive, so you can type in your address here and it'll zoom in to where you're at, and then you can move it out and see what dots might be surrounding your house or where you work. And as you can see, it's clustered very much to east of the Mississippi, but not exclusively. Truth is that over 99% of us have PFAS in our bodies. We know this from research that's done, the NHANES federal research that's done every year looks at PFAS, and we'll talk a bit about what CDC ATSDR is doing right now in those hotspots. Hotspots tend to be near military bases because of the use of firefighting foam, AFFF firefighting foam that has PFAS in it. It will leach into the water, and PFAS sticks around for a very long time. Good news is the Biden administration, this comes just from this week, moves to curtail forever chemicals. That's sort of the name, the popular name given to this family of chemicals. You'll learn a little bit later on that EPA hasn't moved on this in several years, despite the increasing research on health effects. So what is this family of chemicals? Cute little picture, doesn't cover all of them, but the idea is that PFAS includes polyfluoroalkyls, perfluoroalkyls, and other associated fluorinated compounds. Well, you might have remembered them being called PFCs, but we've learned a lot since that time. Actually, it's only been a few years. We were working on projects related to PFCs about 6 or 7 years ago, and a lot has changed since that time in our understanding of health effects, but also how many of these chemicals are actually related. So PFAS bioaccumulate in our body. It takes a while for them to exit. And depending on the kind of PFAS, a lot of research has been done on PFOA and PFAS, but there's others, PFBA and PFHXS, that are also rising to the top in our research and related health effects. And we'll talk about some of those in a bit. You can see that the PFHXS can last 35 years in the system, which is a long time. So these chemicals are important for a whole variety of reasons. We don't just get them in the water, we get them in consumer products, which we'll touch on. So there's widespread human exposure. It can affect the developing fetus and child, and we'll touch on some of those significant findings to date. As we mentioned, there's long half-lives in humans. It can increase cancer risk, specifically kidney and prostate and testicular cancer. It can and typically does bioaccumulate. What does that mean? That means that it takes a while for your body to get rid of it, so it just builds up in your system over time. And finally, it is a contaminant of emerging concern. It is of concern since the 1970s, 1980s. But it's becoming more of concern because we're learning how many people have it in their systems and at incredibly high levels. PFAS levels that exceed the EPA's lifetime health advisory. They have a health advisory in the water at 70 parts per trillion. Many states and communities exceed that in their water. And so there's, again, growing concern over time what this can do to our health. Basically, I keep talking about elimination, and PFAS binds to tissue protein, similar to methylmercury, and it accumulates in the blood, but it's also found in the liver, kidneys, and the brain. They are not metabolized by the body. They are primarily excreted through urine. They are also excreted through breast milk during pregnancy and menstruation, crosses the placenta. The shorter chain PFAS, those shorter carbon chains, tend to be eliminated faster than the longer chain PFAS, and elimination rates appear to be different in males than females. As I said, it's been detected in the blood of over 99% of people in the US. We know that PFAS can impact organ systems. We know this not only through animal studies, but human studies. And as I said, it's been detected in many drinking water systems. So the article about the EPA and Biden really is about looking at how do we get water filtration systems and plants to clean that out of the water, get that out of the water. And we'll talk about individual home water filtration systems as well. My personal opinion is we need to hold the polluters accountable. We're paying to get sick from these chemicals through the products we buy, and then we're paying to be sick in the hospital, and then we're paying to get the stuff cleaned out of our water. This doesn't seem fair to me personally. Anyway, the EPA health advisory, as I said, is 70 parts per trillion. And that's only for 2 of the many perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl substances, specifically PFOA and PFAS. Some states, and we've done a lot of work in the Pennsylvania area, Warminster as one example, that has a military base. Many of those communities have decided to release their own standard below what the EPA is for safety's sake. The thing to keep in mind is that 70 parts per trillion is just advisory. It's not regulatory. So it's not something that water system plants need to report on in the water report every year. And it's not a standard that has to be met. So it's just a suggestion. So as I mentioned, PFAS can reach children through the placental barrier and breast milk. Children are more vulnerable because they have an immature blood-brain barrier. They have immature vital organs. Everything's still growing up until the age of 18. They ingest more toxicants pound per pound body weight compared to adults. They spend more time on the floor, and we'll learn that one of the primary sources of exposure is carpets that are stain resistant, and the dust that comes off of those products in the home. And they're more likely to put objects in their mouths. So those things that might have dust from with PFAS in it, they're more likely to get into their system. So PFAS is used in nonstick cookware, carpet and clothing treatments, stain guard treatments, paper and cardboard packaging, like the French fry holder there, AFFF firefighting foam, and it's also derived from waste from manufacturing facilities, such as we found with DuPont that makes the Teflon coated pans, firefighting foam runoff, and exposure pathways include primarily drinking water. And unfortunately, those folks with wells, and there were quite a few communities in Pennsylvania when we started this 7 years ago, had no idea because they don't have a water treatment plant that sends them a water report every year. And so they had high levels in their wells. As I mentioned, air and dust. Fish that are swimming and living in contaminated waters, that has been a big concern for folks, particularly in the Northeast, but also in the Midwest and Michigan. There was a plant, a hush puppy plant, that put out a lot of PFAS, and people with incredibly high levels in their bloodstream. As I mentioned, consumer products such as food containers and wrapping, clothing, rain-proof gear, for example, and we mentioned cookware. So there are other potential pathways. As I mentioned, breast milk, cord blood, because it does go through the placenta. The good news is that there was a request by the government for industry to discontinue the use of perfluoroalkyl substances in their production of their products. And since that's happened, the blood levels have gone down substantially over time. There are these hotspots, if you will, where the chemical family is being used predominantly in the industry or in the military bases that use the firefighting foam, the AFFF. Depending on the specific PFAS, what we're finding in the breast milk is about 3 to 10% of what we're finding in mom serum. And so when we talk to pregnant women or women that are thinking about getting pregnant, we encourage them to do a check on just an inventory of where they might have risk of getting exposed to PFAS, and to reduce their exposure before they begin breastfeeding. Currently, breastfeeding outweighs the risk posed by any PFAS exposure, but the science is still pretty new longitudinally as we're looking at children. So what are some of the health effects? This is a small, this screen shows things that have had consistent, significant findings. There is a lot of emerging science, and I'm going to touch on that in just a bit. Increased cholesterol levels, changes in liver enzymes, decreases in infant birth weights. Now, these decreases are small. The larger decreases are not as significant currently, but there is cause for concern because we're finding that with some of this emerging science that mom's triglycerides are going up. There are other issues around diabetes, glucose intolerance. And so there are some concerns that some of this may also spill over into the fetus and the baby. We do know that there's decreased vaccine response in children, actually, and also in adults. And so there has been a study, and you'll find it on that fact sheet by Philippe Grandjean this year, that shows that the chemical PFBA have been associated with severe disease outcomes for people that get COVID. So people that have high levels of that one PFAS chemical are more likely to be hospitalized, to be put into the ICU and to die. So we're seeing a decreased vaccine response. PFAS are immunotoxic, and so it really changes the body's ability to produce antibodies. We also know with confidence that increases the risk of high blood pressure. Also, whether it's in regular adults or pregnant adults, pregnant adults or non-pregnant adults. Anyway, we will be talking about medical management and how to help folks that believe that they have or know they have high levels over time. These are recommendations, very broad. I can say that the National Academy of Sciences report that's coming out in May of 2022 will give more specific guidelines for clinicians. And then finally, there's an increased risk of kidney and testicular cancer. There is some research that points to prostate cancer as well. And as I mentioned, immunotoxicity and developmental toxicity are among the most sensitive endpoints. Dr. Grandjean and his research team have really stayed focused on this one area. And I had the pleasure of meeting him at a conference a couple years ago, probably 3 years ago now. And he was desperate to get our government to come up with some guidelines, because what there's continuing to see is a poor response to childhood vaccines, reduced antibody concentrations and responses, in particular for rubella, diphtheria, and tetanus. And now with this one chemical, PFBA, COVID vaccines as well. So what are the clinical implications? Well, my background is public health, so it's always prevention. So once somebody is exposed, it's really hard to fix it. Fill in the blank, whether it's PFAS or lead or arsenic or whatever. So the best strategy is prevention of exposure. There will come out in the report, there is a chemical therapy that has been promising, but I'm not going to share it right now because we're still reviewing the science on that. But right now, the general recommendation is there's no therapy that can effectively eliminate PFAS. What we really need to do is look at sort of our risk for exposure and reduce or eliminate those if possible. So how do we do that? Well, we talked about some of the primary ways that we get it. In addition to water, are products we buy. And we need to be really mindful about what we buy and what ends up in our body. The stain resistant carpet, clothing, and furniture, it breaks down over time and it goes into the dust and it's everywhere. So if you can get rid of those carpets, wood floors are always better, or tile or whatever, if you can do it. There's, as I said, stain resistant, water resistant clothing. We all have raincoats. We all have things that keep us dry. We need to be mindful how long we keep these things, because they do, again, dust off. If you have a nonstick pan, just throw it out. There's actually a YouTube video where people are throwing out their pans after they watch the movie, The Devil We Know. Just spray a little oil on the pan, and it does the same thing. I do it all the time. It works. True story. When Teflon first came out, and it's still true, but if you had a bird in a cage and you were heating up that pan to cook, those fumes could kill the bird. So not only are they in the food, but they're also in the air. And then the packaging, because it's oil resistant and water resistant, it's used extensively in food packaging. Now, the FDA banned it from pizza boxes in, I don't know, it was a couple years ago now. But those French fries are in a box that has PFAS in it. Trust me on that. So what else do we do to reduce exposures? So there are drinking water filters. Unfortunately, the little pitchers, the Pure or the Brita, they will take out lead, but they're not going to take out the PFAS. The next slide talks about, and I can make these, or these slides will be available. There's a whole list of companies that make specific water filters, whether they're under the sink or whether they're whole house, that will take the PFAS out. Keep in mind that you've got to change the filter now and then. It will beep and light up and tell you when you have to change a filter. It's not like one and done. You buy it and then you have to change that filter periodically. Premixed baby formula, if you think that your water is contaminated in your home, and or purchase water that is not PFAS contaminated to premix the baby formula. Check your local fish advisories, particularly if you consume fish. If you catch it and consume it, just avoid certain consumer products. We listed many of them. Even dental floss, the Easy Glide stuff has PFAS on it. Test your garden soil, because PFAS is in the water. And if you're watering your plants, the plants will take up the PFAS, and it'll also stay in the soil. So just think about from where it comes from to how it gets to you. So I'm not going to linger long. Again, you can email us at macche@villanova.edu. This is a sample. We're not endorsing any of these. We're just saying you got a selection here. So you can either use granular activated carbon or reverse osmosis. How do we know this? Because Michigan did a huge study on it, and it continues to look at filters. water filters and PFAS. So is there medical testing? Yes, there is. There's only 3 places that do it. One is in Canada. It's about $600 to get it done, and most insurance companies will not pay for it. So when somebody wants their blood tested, and I had this, we just had a family this week. The options are pretty limited. When is biomonitoring helpful? So if you want to know your baseline, and you can, with one of the tests, one of the labs, you can compare it to the federal average of what the average American has in their bloodstream. The other 2 do not do the complete spectrum of testing in the way that the federal one does. You can confirm that, yeah, you're right, you were exposed to high levels of PFAS. It'll help us identify if there's a community or a prevalence of people living in an area, such as in Michigan by the hush puppy plant. Identifying temporal trends over time. We do know through the work of ATSDR that the levels are going down in the United States overall, even though we all have it. Almost all of us have it. It's going down. We can look at whether public health efforts will help reduce values, blood values, and it helps us set priorities for future research, but it also helps inform us about occupational safety measures that are needed. And that was a big push with the first study done. It was called C8, and we'll talk briefly about that. So what do? If somebody comes in, they don't want to pay for the test, but they think they've been exposed, many of the things like cholesterol testing, blood pressure testing, we should be doing anyway. And if it's high, then we can discuss with the patient, family history, all those other things that can lead to high cholesterol or high blood pressure, and track it over time and talk to them about potential sources of PFAS that they can help eliminate from their exposure. So thorough history, simple screening test, even just a question answer can suffice. Physical exam and assessment. The one thing to please not do is to dismiss people as being crazy, hyper worried about it. Many people over the last couple years. So ATSDR has been doing these assessments for a while now. They've had town hall meetings, and invariably they've talked about physicians specifically dismissing them and telling them basically to go home. There's nothing to worry about. So let's not dismiss. Let's be good listeners, as I know we can be, and take as much information as we can, and maybe do a little research and find out with that map whether that person might be living in an area that could have been exposed. At any rate, we know that there is no specific testing recommendations or screening based on PFAS levels. So if somebody comes in and says, oh my God, I pay the money and my level's really high, there's still no guidelines as far as if it's this high, do this. If it's this high, do this. We are working on that through the National Academy of Sciences study. And as I said, that should be done by May of next year. We currently are not able to connect a specific health problem to PFAS because, of course, we would need a specific test to do that for us. Repeat testing for PFAS is currently not medically indicated. Again, that's between the clinician and the patient. I can tell you, for anyone that's really interested in sort of medical monitoring, something called the C8 study. So this chemical family is carbon-8. And so this was quite some time ago, but there's detailed information about if you lived in a certain area that was polluted by DuPont, what you could expect to get from this lawsuit that paid for people to get tracking over time. And this is being used as one of our resources for the NASM report, and it is helpful. Again, some of these things that we're finding, like high cholesterol, most people will get tested anyway. And then it goes back to, how do you stop this and manage it? Well, we've got medications, but even better to get that level down. So this is the website. You just do NASM PFAS and you can get to the website. They've recorded all the town hall meetings, all the presentations by scientists, all the presentations by the CDC, ATSDR, if you want to learn more. There's also, I just took a screenshot of the front of the clinician guidance that's currently on the CDC ATSDR website. That's basically what we're working on through this NASM study. So wrapping up, as I said, Hannah is going to share with us the fact sheet, and you will be getting that as well in the follow-up email after the webinar. And it's quite long, but we heard from professionals that they wanted to know the science behind what we were saying.
So we had to consent to being recorded before we were allowed. Got it.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So what is the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry doing? They have had a massive effort over the last 18 to 24 months to really look at possible health effects. They're going door to door in selected communities with high risk to do urine and blood tests, to do dust samples and water samples, to address community health concerns through these town hall meetings, to take action based on the scientific information. They actually paid for NASM to pull together this study to help them better educate and provide better guidelines for healthcare providers and to better inform communities. I'm not going to go through this, but it's a pretty in-depth process and very much in a community engagement is core to this. I've been so thrilled by it because we've had community representatives coming and speaking to the study committee and sending us letters and going to the town hall meetings. It's been really, I think, very well done, very well designed. And it really, I think, makes a huge difference in how we get to our final recommendations. So when people are talking about blood tests, they are testing blood and urine, as I said earlier. And they're looking at communities and seeing if there's large populations of communities that have problems and high levels, and what environmental factors are actually influencing those risks. Keep in mind that when someone gets a blood test, we don't know based on that level whether they're going to get sick or not from PFAS. We don't know whether they're going to get a particular health condition or if something they have is from PFAS. We don't know how or where somebody was exposed. And we don't know exactly when or how long they've been exposed. So the blood test is a snapshot in time. It doesn't tell us sort of the beginning and the end. It tells us today what the level is and helps us sort of manage and plan. For folks that are really interested in learning more from outside of the government, there's the PFAS Exchange.org. They are doing, they've got funding through NIEHS to look at health effects, and they've also been part of the conversation with the study committee. Annie's coming out with a new ebook soon, and there's a whole chapter on PFAS in that. The pediatric environmental health specialty units that I mentioned, if you go to PEHSU.net, PEHSU.net, you will get to the site and you'll see information about PFAS, more webinars, etc. In fact, we, because of the extra money we're getting from EPA and CDC ATSDR, we're going to be doing an echo for health professionals early next year on PFAS, and based on the recommendations, probably a little later than early, probably closer to May. And here's the website here. Just FYI, if you're interested in environmental health, which I'm sure you all are because you're on this call, there are webinars, online courses, and fact sheets and everything at this web address, and there's free CE available. And that is our email again. And I see that there are a number of questions. So did you want?
Laura, this is Hannah. I can do the questions. I took them out as they were coming in.
Oh, good. Okay.
So the first couple questions had to do with any recommendations you have on safe and affordable cookware.
Yeah. So honestly, the safest and most affordable are iron skillets. You know, those old iron skillets that your grandmother used to have. They're very safe. There's no PFAS in them, and they last forever. And you can also get aluminum pans, but the iron is a little better for your health. So, but either one works.
Thank you. Another question is referring to the environmental working group map, the interactive one. Are there increased levels in tested water with blue dot areas because they are tested, and are other areas not tested as much, for example, Montana?
It's a great question. So that map changes every couple months. And what Environmental Working Group has done is they've folded in the federal data along with the data that they're collecting and putting it on the map. And so what you're seeing are those definitive sources of PFAS water exposure, sources of exposure from water on the map, but not necessarily, the blank areas does not mean that you're safe at all. And so as that map gets more data onto it, you'll see, I had to update it because I did this back in April and there were a lot more dots on it. So stay tuned, just keep checking.
Some people want to know if we'll have access to your slides.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then in terms of the education and other resources that were shared, I will send all of those out with the email of the recording and a link to the post-test for CE credit. I'll also include all of the resources she mentioned.
Okay.
And that is it in the chat for questions. Does anyone have any questions for Laura they want to unmute themselves and ask?
I noticed that somebody mentioned that they have something called Green Pan, which I have not, I think I might have seen a commercial on that, but I don't know much about that at all. But I will check into that for sure.
This is Katie, and I was actually in a little chat about this the other day, and some of these like non-PFAS, non-stick pans, they're coated in things like silicone or other things. And the concern is, are we going to 10 years from now, everyone's going to be like, oh, there was problems with silicone. You know, it's who knows? It's
I know. I have the same concerns, and I do. I have read some stuff, some emerging science that is suggesting that silicone is not as stable as we think, and so you know, any. I'm going to go out on a limb here, but anything that's chemically produced has the potential for becoming a problem, right? Because many chemicals that come into our system is not aware that it's so some of the problems with PFAS is the body can't recognize it as being a chemical, and so it does all these changes in it because it's seeing this as either a hormone or part of the body chemical makeup. And so when we're looking at things that are produced with chemical foundation, I think we always have to just be mindful that, you know, we want to be careful about it. And that's why I jokingly, I mean, I wasn't kidding. I have 2 iron pans as well. I have an aluminum and an iron pan, and I use olive oil. I'm vegetarian. I noticed there was a vegan in there. And obviously you know, you can use broth too, to keep it from sticking, but you know, we have things that we're pretty gosh darn sure are good for us, like the iron is good for us, for most of us. So I think that, you know, it's a great question, Katie, with the silicone. I've been checking that out a lot because it seems like everything that's new has some sort of silicone, whether you're making muffins or whatever. I couldn't find an old-fashioned aluminum tin to make muffins at all, anywhere. And I found some in my dad's basement. So, you know, I think we need to be mindful that if we're making this with chemicals, man-made chemicals, that it may be problematic moving forward.
Hi, I had a question. This is Michelle. I want to thank you, Dr. Anderko, for this fantastic lecture. Going back to the map now with that fire retardant, because Colorado, California have the wildfires, and I was wondering, looking at the map, is that why it would be an increase in that area? But you said it was your collection along with the government, those blue dots.
Yeah, so the purple dots are important as well. And, you know, Colorado has a number of military bases. And, you know, most of them use firefighting foam. So why do they use it? Well, they go through training, right? And if something catches on fire, they need to know how to put out the fire. And then it rolls into the water, and it stays in the water. And so you may want to look at ATSDR. So CDC, ATSDR, if you do ATSDR PFAS, they will have a map and they will show you the military sites of concern. And they will, you can also, it's somewhat interactive. You can go in and kind of look at some of the data. But the general wisdom is that if there's a military base, and when we counsel families, if there's a military base nearby, we assume that there's PFAS exposure in the water, period. So if there are military bases, which there are in Colorado, I would say those communities that get water from that same area, aquifer or creek or whatever it is, are most likely going to have some level of PFAS in their water. I'm sorry, but the map is fun and it's interactive, but it's not 100% finished.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We had another question. Is there any public policy measures being put into place to reduce PFAS exposure during the production of products?
Say that one more time.
Is there any public policy measures being put into place to reduce PFAS exposure during the production of these products?
No. In a nutshell, no. There's been a lot of work on that end, just general chemical policy. As I mentioned, the government asked industry to voluntarily reduce their use of PFAS. But there's no policy in play that I'm aware of that will regulate PFAS use in consumer products. And I saw Jane Goodall, who was interviewed on Sunday, and she has such a wonderful way about her, but she was asked about the rainforest being decimated and how the gorillas are being hurt by it and what can people do. And she said, you know, just be mindful of what you buy. You have so much power in that dollar that you are spending, and we forget. Perfect example is when we found out that there was BPA, bisphenol A, in baby bottles. Moms stopped buying those bottles in the thousands. And what happened? Walmart came up with a different type of baby bottle. Now, is its replacement better? Maybe not. But the point is that we had been discussing that at the EPA, was part of the Children's Health Protection Advisory Committee for a couple years on how to better regulate BPA. No policy. All it took was it to be mentioned in a couple newspaper articles in Wisconsin, hit the Associated Press, people stopped buying it. And guess what? You can buy BPA-free water bottles, baby bottles, whatever, just because consumers made a statement. So throw out your nonstick pan and buy. There's all sorts of ideas on here, which I think is lovely. Stainless steel is another. You know, just do it and it'll make a difference. They want you to buy their stuff. Just stop buying the stuff that's going to make us or our kids sick. And we know Christmas is coming and the ship liners are all stalled. So buy now, you know, buy. Buy those iron skillets. Anyway, sorry. We're so into buying in this country. It's unbelievable. Anyway. What else do we got? Any others?
Margot asks, on the interactive map for PFAS contamination, I noticed the blue dot is right over my hometown's water plant. Is there any rules over notifying city residents of the PFAS?
Nope. You can call the water company. I know in my water report, I get that. They do test for it. I think they're required to test for it, but I don't think they're required to report it. Now, it might have changed, but I would just call them directly and ask it. Or first go to your city's water report and see what's listed in there. And Katie put up a good link, what they're going to be doing around PFAS and its use in production of certain products. Boy, I hope it's hopeful. Is it, Katie? Do you know?
There's a lot in it. When they had originally posted their kind of draft ideas around regulations, they were really weak. And I think they listened to stakeholders, and it's much better. But I honestly haven't had a chance to go into great detail, but I know that they're looking at a number of different PFAS chemicals. They expanded the number of different industries that they're going to be looking at. And I believe they're adding PFAS to the toxic releases inventory.
Oh,
I'm not
good.
100%, but I think that's what I had heard.
Okay.
So that means the manufacturers will have to report their releases or what they're using
Yeah, yeah.
to the EPA. So,
Okay, good. I'll check that out. You know, the charge of our committee at NASM is to just look at the science and the health effects and base recommendations based on that. It's not to talk about policy, except we're always talking about the policy because you can't help not talk about it, right? I see from Karen that there was a question about child fire retardant PJs. Get rid of them. Get rid of them. There are other chemicals in there. Just get rid of them. They're toxic. They're bad. Get rid of them. Wait, if you got to buy some for Christmas, buy all cotton. Organic if you can afford it. Yeah, the fire resistant stuff is bad. So we got a minute or two. I don't know if there's any other questions, but great questions. And thank you again. We love partnering with Annie, and hope to see you again and have fun in Glasgow.
oh, thank you. And just as a reminder for folks, we will be sending out the recording materials and the post-test. Usually, like I said, it usually takes us a day or two to get it out. And then it may take another day or two for you to get your certificates. So be on the lookout for those. And thank you so much, Dr. Andico. That was really great.
Thank you, Dr. Huffling.
Laura, if you have time for one more question.
Sure.
Is there an environmentally safe way to dispose of products like pajamas with fire retardants in them?
Not really. You know, some communities will take it as part of hazardous waste, but not typically. I'm sorry to say, no.
And then one last, where do we start? If you could give us one little send away on something we can do right now.
You know, find out about your water supply, see what your own exposures are, do your own little checklist, and get informed, because this is going to hit pretty hard in the spring. And, you know, nurses tend to lead the charge. We're pretty much ahead of the curve. So to be one of those that are ahead of the curve, be knowledgeable about where it's found, and be ready to help people reduce their exposures, because people will be really concerned by this, as they should be. And think about getting a water filter if you can. If you can afford it, do it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good week. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.